Hi, I'm Jeremy Goldman, and this is FUTUREPROOF. For our 100th episode, we wanted to try something a little different. You're going to hear what the team behind this show has found most interesting from the conversations we've had with futurists and leaders from across a wide variety of disciplines. We're going to bring you some of our favorite clips from our archive, and I wanted to turn things over to some of the fine folks who work on the show to introduce these segments. Take it away, Erin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Cohen, assistant producer here at FUTUREPROOF. We wanted to start things off with Nir Eyal. He's a best-selling author and expert in behavioral engineering. We spoke to him earlier this year about our increasingly tech-dependent and distracted society and how all of that distraction may just be the result of unresolved and or uncomfortable feelings. Here's what he had to say.
Reality is, you know why we overeat? You know why we overbinge on technology? Because of feelings. Distraction and procrastination is not a character flaw. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that we haven't learned how to deal with uncomfortable emotional states. That is the root cause of all distraction. Nobody wants to talk about this because it's super icky sticky about talking about our feelings. But the fact of the matter is that whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, all of these too muches we are doing to escape our own heads. Because when your head is an uncomfortable place to be, you want to get somewhere else. And so if you're lonely, check Facebook. If you're uncertain, Google it. If you're bored, well, lots of solutions for boredom. Watch TV, watch Netflix, go on Reddit, go on Pinterest, check news. Lots of things to help us take our mind off of these feelings. So the way we have to deal with distraction of any sort is to understand what is the discomfort we are trying to escape. Because if we don't deal with that fact, Facebook didn't invent distraction, for God's sakes, right? Plato talked about it 2,500 years ago. Plato, the Greek philosopher, talked about in the Greek akrasia, the tendency to do things against our better interest. So if he was complaining about people being distracted 2,500 years ago, it's not technology's fault, people. It's that we don't have the skills, the habits to make sure that when we feel emotional discomfort, that we do things that help lead us to things that we want to do as opposed to getting distracted.
So this is one thing that I'm really curious about, and I think you even anticipated a few of my questions that I don't even have to ask, so you make my life easier. But I think one thing that I was really curious about is it a fait accompli where each one of us wants to do a better job on an ongoing basis at not being as distracted? But then you have these monolithic companies that I get, like we're not supposed to say like McDonald's or Facebook as the root of the problem. And we do have the ability to overcome these things. And there have always been things that we've been trying to fight against from a distraction standpoint. But yet I can't help but think that these companies are going to figure out better and better in some ways to hook us on technology, and that we in turn have to get better and better at figuring out how to be indistractable?
The answer is yes. The companies will get better and better at making products that turn your time and attention into money. That's what they do. And nobody is lily white, right? Everybody here plays the same exact game. I don't care where you get your news. All of them monetize your attention. That's what they all do. Every media company does that, whether you're reading a Harry Potter book or whether you're watching CNN or reading the New York Times. They turn your time into money. And you know what? We want them to. Products becoming more engaging is not a problem. It's progress. Do we really want to tell Facebook, hey, Facebook, I like your product so much I want to use it a lot. Hey, Netflix, your shows, they're so good. I want to watch them. Can you make more boring shows so I won't want to watch them so much? Hey, Apple, the iPhone, it's so user-friendly. Can you please make it harder to use? No, of course not. So we don't want technology products to become less user-friendly, less engaging. We want them to be engaging. That's what makes them good. What we have to do is to understand the difference between use and overuse. And to do that, we have to understand the difference between traction and distraction. What is distraction? If we really understand what distraction is, we have to understand where the word comes from. That if you look at the root of the word distraction, it has a common Latin root with the word traction. That traction and distraction come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. So traction, by definition, is any action. You'll notice the word ends in A-C-T-I-O-N, ends in action, as does distraction, by the way, right? They both end in the same word. A-C-T-I-O-N spells action. So traction is any action, by definition, that pulls us towards something we want to do. Traction are actions that help us live out our values, become the kind of person we want to be, do things with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, any action that pulls us away from what we plan to do, anything that is not done with intent, anything that pulls us away from our values and the person we want to become. So why is this so important? Any action can be either a distraction or traction based on one word. And that one word is forethought. Forethought. So if you are doing something you plan to do with your time, it is traction. If something is not that, it's distraction. So if you plan to play a video game, do it. If you plan to go on Facebook, enjoy. If you want to watch a show on Netflix, let yourself, but do it on your schedule, not the tech companies.
When Jason Feifer, editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, visited our studios, he argued that society's definition of just about everything keeps on changing. TV isn't dying, it's just taking a different form. Community isn't dying, it's just that the bowling leagues of yesteryear have been replaced by WhatsApp.
We can intellectually understand that rock and roll did not damage a generation, but then once we become of a certain age and we don't understand why the younger generation is reacting to things the way that they are, we think, well, this time is different because I am witnessing it myself. I can't relate to these kids. I don't understand these kids. These kids are talking in a language that I don't understand. Something has to be wrong here. I must be witnessing something wrong. And of course, the intellectual response to that is, no, that's literally what everyone has said since the beginning of time. But that's a really hard thing for us to emotionally process.
Yeah, I think a lot about the kids these days, and I know you covered this about, how they're, lazier than ever before and things like that. And, well, I think there's just always going to be some dissonance between one generation and another. Mm-hmm. And that's something that has always been true. So
the older generation doesn't want to be replaced.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting to me also, because at this show and based off of the people who I speak to, we're always trying to figure out where things are going to go, and we're often covering new technologies. We just covered infertility, which obviously is arguably fertility is like the original technology, and I think that there's always some hesitancy to say that everything has happened before in exactly the same way, right? Because sometimes it's the same thing thematically, but things are, but there's an element that gets thrown in that changes things. And a perfect example I would say is humans are going to have conflict. They're going to have war. Let's say when you talk about biological weapons or nuclear weapons, that's something that could change things because somebody reacts, but now they have the ability to react and wipe out more people. So what do you say to that general thought? Would you say that certain things can change, but the general impulses of society stay the same?
Yes. That is. So I think about it. I think that people confuse the thing with the form. So the thing is a core element of us, of our society, the structure of our society, of humanness. So community, the desire for community, the desire for communication, the desire for fighting. These are the things. And then the form is whatever form it happens to take in that time. So community equals bowling leagues. There's a form from the 1950s. Or community equals WhatsApp groups. There's a form for now. Are they exactly the same? No, of course they're not exactly the same, but they're an expression of the same thing, which is community, some form of community. And I think the problem that we have is that once we are used to one form, we grow up with one form, and then we get older and we see that the next generation is not expressing in that form. They're not using the form. They're not going to the bowling leagues. And we equate one to the other. Well, if they don't have the form, then they don't have the thing. If they don't have the bowling leagues, then they don't have community. But that's not true. They just have community in a different way, in a way that you may not recognize, in a way that you may poo-poo. And you say, well, how could they have community over WhatsApp? Well, you know what? They do. So why don't you start with that? Why don't you work backwards from the facts instead of just dismissing the facts and saying you don't understand it? The fact is there's a community. So work backwards from that.
I think a perfect example to me, and this is super basic, is when I hear people talk about, TV being dead, and then you think about how much Netflix people are consuming. Well, that's TV, but like if you're going to be so narrow as to say that, your cable subscription equals TV, and now this new delivery system, but other than that, you're watching it on a TV, right? Yeah. I mean, TV is not dead. Arguably, it's growing in terms of the amount of time, simply because we've got so many options. I can watch TV on the subway now. It's just on a really small screen. And we're just not calling it that. Right. But that doesn't mean it's not that.
That's right. And also, but you know what? Who cares if TV is dead? I mean, like, who cares if TV is dead? Because the point is, entertainment is not dead, right? So, yeah, it'll take different forms, right? We call it TV because of a box that used to sit in our living room that one day will not sit in our living room. And then it'll be a question of whether or not we continue to use the word TV, right? The way that we continue to call our cell phones, even though the phone is the smallest part of what we do on that thing. We might continue to use the language, but who cares? Who cares if it goes away? I mean, right. Also, just because something has been around for a couple decades, which let's keep in mind, TV has only been around for a couple decades, doesn't mean that we need to have it forever.
Yeah. Yeah. But the people who are obviously there are a lot of vested interests in any one technology and kind of making it like it's a big deal if this thing goes away. But you're right. I think that a lot of people aren't taking kind of a macro view of history and what actually matters to people. Like entertainment matters,
right?
But the forms of entertainment have always changed throughout history.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what do you want? If you're in that world, I present to you two choices. Do you want retention of television as we have thought about it for decades to be the hill that you die upon? That's the thing you're going to hold on to? Or do you want to say, you know what? People love to be entertained. I am a good entertainer. I know how to tell stories. I will tell stories in the format in which they want to be told or they want to be received. And then you go there. What do you rather do? Would you rather just hang on to the old technology because it's what we had? Or would you rather go where people are going right now because they still like the thing that you do? They may just not like it in the form that you're used to. And that's okay.
Hi, this is V. Cortuccio, associate producer. Some things such as community have taken a step forward, but one thing we've learned while making this podcast is that the future isn't always about progress. Take sex, for example. Cindy Gallop, an advertising legend and sex provocateur, believes there are multiple reasons as to why, as a society, we are, to borrow a quote from her, so fucked up about sex. Virtually every major industry ignores sex entirely. Is there a future in tapping into the sexuality of their consumers?
But I mean, why do you think that we inherently create these taboos? What's the value to us in taking this thing that, like you said, we need to show a lot of vulnerability, if we're going to be naked with somebody, right? But why does it benefit us to even have taboos in general in society?
Well, I'm asked all the time, why are we as a society so fucked up about sex? And I'm asked this so often I have my answer down pat. 3 reasons. Okay, so number one, centuries of repression, religion, social-cultural dynamics, as I said, in every single country in the world. Again, this syndrome is global. Number 2, the patriarchy. Because historically, every single institution, including government and religion, has been male-dominated. We as women have never been allowed to bring our lens to bear on human sexuality, and the world is a poorer place for it. And number 3, very straightforwardly, there are not enough people like me. And what I mean by that is society makes it extraordinarily difficult to disrupt social narratives around sex. Many people have tried and given up. We need many more people like me who will not give up no matter what. And, one of the things that I do in this context, because, I'm trying to change all of this, and that extends even beyond Make Love Not Porn, but it also extends to, I fight so many battles building this business that I take the same advice I give to other entrepreneurs, which is when you have a truly world-changing startup, you have to change the world to fit it, not the other way around. And so I have been leveraging my position and profile in the advertising industry for years to try and get our industry as a really important dynamic in popular culture to pioneer and set the agenda in opening up all of this. And so 6 years ago, I spoke at Cannes Lions in a seminar called Porn, Youth and Brands, the biggest socio-cultural influence on young people today that we don't talk about. So stacked out audience, as you can imagine. And so during this session, I said to the audience, okay, show of hands, please. How many of you in the audience are strategic planners? So a whole host of hands shoots up. I go, great. I go, keep your hand up if you are the kind of strategic planner who, when you are developing a strategy for the client, writing a brief for the creative department, writes something like this. Our target audience is an 18 to 24-year-old young man. This is the kind of place he tends to live. This is the job he does. This is where he hangs out with his friends. This is how many hours of porn he watches a week, and this is how it impacts his relationship with his girlfriend. No hands. I said to the audience, we do consumers a huge disservice when we do not apply to this universal area of human experience the same insights and psychological analysis we do to every other area of consumer attitudes and behavior. And the reason this is so important is exemplified by the fact that a couple of years later, Flamingo Research, global research company, brought me back to Cannes, and they asked me to speak on a panel called Sex, the Final Marketing Frontier. And so what I said to the audience from that panel was, people have sex in cars, especially in markets around the world where premarital sex is frowned upon, in markets where young people live at home with their parents till they get married, which, by the way, given the economy, is now the US, or in markets where it's traditional for whole families to live together commonly in households, so even husbands and wives cannot find privacy to be intimate. So all around the world, a huge number of people are having a huge amount of sex in a huge number of cars. But the automotive industry is spectacularly failing to factor this into product design and marketing. Even more fundamentally, people have sex in bed, but the mattress industry focuses all its R&D on sleep. Mm-hmm. People have sex on kitchen counters, but the kitchen industry is not taking that into account when designing height, width, depth, comfort. The point being, Jeremy, that there is a far broader business application of all of this than merely directly sex-related products, and brands and businesses are leaving money on the table when they do not embrace that fact.
Cindy's keynotes often talk about how women's perspectives have been disregarded by the advertising industry, but that's not the only place where women haven't been treated equally to men. Lindsay Kaplan is the co-founder of Chief, a professional network focused on connecting and supporting women leaders. Does the COVID-19 pandemic and its disproportionate effect on female workers mean we could see an increase in disparities between men and women in the workplace?
And has COVID hit professional, women in executive leadership on average differently than it has men? I'm not sure if there's, some kind of data out there. I know I've heard anecdotes.
Yeah, there is data that shows that women are stepping back. And so this pandemic has disproportionately affected women and moms. And I say women, not just moms, because women are often caretakers of their parents, of people around them. And so it is absolutely hitting women in the workforce. And I think this is going to be detrimental for years to come, to see how people are pausing their jobs. They're taking time off. They're leaning out of their day-to-day job. It is this, and I say this as a mom of two, it is absolutely impossible for me to be at the capacity I was at pre-pandemic. It's impossible. So it's tough on women. We know that they are disproportionately taking on more childcare, more housework. And so we as a society have to support and make sure that we are not discounting moms. We are not discounting anybody, any parent in the workplace that has to lean out a little bit to make sure that they're supporting their family through this ridiculous trash fire of a year.
Yeah, it's actually interesting just because my wife works, and my work earlier in this year was a lot more flexible than hers. So there was a time where we fled New York and I was fully in charge of the kids basically for about an entire month, and then just got little increments of work done when I could. And then I realized this is the position that a lot of women often find themselves in, where they're the person who takes the brunt of it, essentially, whenever anything happens in a family, but they're still, they still have their professional obligations and they find a way to get it done. And not saying all women, but I think in general, there's a lot of just kind of toughness and grit that goes along with it, and not complaining when you have to do more than your fair share.
Listen, I think there is more exception, and there is data that supports this, that when a man and women get to an equivalent high up place in their career, when a dad has to leave early for soccer practice, when a dad has pictures of his kids on his desk, there is a feeling of, wow, that guy, of course you have to leave early. What a great dad. And women don't have that benevolence associated with them taking time off for their kids, right? We're actually punished as, she's not working hard enough. Oh, her job is second to her kids. And so we really have to step back and check our bias, the way we think about moms and dads. I always joke with my team, I never try to be a great mom. I try to be the world's best dad. And it usually gets a laugh, but there is a completely different set of expectations that we have as Americans around what a mom and a working mom is versus a working dad. And so we have to hold men and women to a similar standard as they parent and cut them both a similar amount of slack right now.
Hi, this is assistant producer Michelle Portnoy. One of the most interesting business stories of 2020 has been how big tech keeps on getting bigger. We spoke to Alex Kantrowitz, formerly of BuzzFeed and presently a CNBC on-air contributor, on how the country needs a strong middle of mid-sized tech companies in order to thrive.
The tech giants do need a check on their power.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to ask you about. It's how big of a problem is it for society that these big tech firms keep getting bigger and bigger? Because I'm of the opinion that there are certain things that no matter how big they get and no matter how much monopolistic power they have, it doesn't really hurt society. And then there are some things where if you wanted to create, let's say, a competitor to Facebook, you can't. There's not a viable path to creating that product. You basically have to go into an entirely different industry or something that's underserved because Facebook has the ability, let's say, and I'm picking on Facebook, but this is true for any of these companies, that they can squash you in your crib if they so choose.
That's right. Look, here's what I think. More than having the ability for other companies to go in and compete with the companies, what our country really needs is a strong middle of the economy. We need strong small businesses. We need strong mid-sized businesses. And, what the size of the tech giants does is it creates marketplaces that these small and mid-sized businesses have no choice but to play in. If you're in advertising, we talked a little bit about marketing before the show. If you're in advertising, you got to use Facebook or Google. You often need to use both, right? If you're selling online, you almost have to use Amazon. And if you don't, you could use Shopify, but then you have to use Google. So you're held hostage. If you're an app developer, you have to use Apple's App Store. And so what you have is a situation where these companies' marketplaces have a tremendous amount of control over the businesses that are the lifeblood of the economy. And to have a healthy society, we need those businesses to thrive. The problem with these companies being so big is we know that there's been situations where they've used their power to make sure that the businesses, the small and medium-sized businesses, depending on them, are able to grow to some extent, but beyond that, they can't really grow. That's sort of Amazon's margin that you're taking. So Amazon will then underprice you or create a private label brand and come in and take your margin. And that's why Amazon is worth $1.5 trillion. And small mom and pops companies are struggling throughout the entire country. Same with news companies, right? News companies, they're at the mercy of Facebook and Google in terms of the amount of money that they're going to make, because they both use them as a traffic sources, and they use them to monetize their traffic. So that's what I think is the issue here. It's not necessarily the size, it's the marketplaces that they have power over, and the fact that we're all subject to that. And so that's what we really have to keep vigilant about when we think about reining in these companies. It's not should they go bigger or not, are they using their power responsibly?
Yeah, and I think that this isn't necessarily my opinion. I think that they do a lot of things properly and have positive impacts on the economy, clearly. But at the same time, the challenge is are you the type of person who believes, like this is what everybody has to think, are you the type of person who believes that a company like Amazon is going to think about the long term versus the short term? Because in the short term, like you just said, if they need to protect their margins, then they are incentivized to squash somebody, who's a smaller player, and then it's bad for the economy. But in the long term, it would probably be a good idea for them to make sure that nobody else forces regulation on them. And I think that's one of the things that I wonder about. We talked about the hearings a bit. I'm wondering, what do you think? How much of the onus for regulation should come from government versus big tech as a whole, even coming together and being responsible and having some type of self-regulation just so that others don't do it for them? Because I feel like the further they go, the more likely they might be to tempt government or force government's hand to try to, regulate in some fashion.
Yeah, I think you touched on the answer in your question, right? Which is that they need to be afraid of getting regulated. So therefore, they will self-regulate themselves and act responsibly. The question is, are they afraid today? I would say absolutely not. We already know that our regulatory body is vastly underfunded. They don't have the resources to go after their companies in the way they would need to. The FTC's head of enforcement came out and said it essentially when they agreed to this $5 billion fine with Facebook that didn't slow Facebook down at all, where he said, if we went down this path a little bit longer, we wouldn't have gotten such a good outcome. Why is that? It's a resources question. It's a cash question. So I do think that they need to build themselves up into a body that can actually cause fear inside these companies. Another thing we should consider, the tech giants were already 17% of the S&P 500 before the pandemic started. Now they're 22%. And I wrote about this a little bit in my big technology newsletter this week. But the fact that there's such a big percent of the S&P, which is supposed to be a broad index that collects 500 companies that represent the economy, the fact that 22% of it is made of the tech giants means something is off there. It means that our economy is so reliant on them that actually going in and actually trying to push regulation in this type of world is exceedingly difficult, because if you overregulate, you're going to end up crushing your constituents' net worth. So what I think these companies need is the healthy fear that regulation is possible, and not this feeling of let's show up on a video conference and then the government will get off of our back for another couple of years. And the way to do that is, without a doubt in my mind, to fund the enforcement agencies, fund the FTC, fund the DOJ, and actually give them some muscle. You don't necessarily need to use it, but the fact that it's there will start to cause these companies to pause a little bit before they go ahead and do nefarious things, again, harming that middle of the economy that we need to be strong in this country.
Someone who knows exactly what a city needs to become a major innovation hub is Mayor John Tory of Toronto. Since he took office, Tory has helped Toronto become one of the premier tech hubs in North America. What allows a city to flourish into a center of innovation the way Toronto has, and what can be learned from collaborating with peers instead of focusing on competition?
Amen to that. So moving back to more important questions, actually, what are some of the top secrets to creating a tech innovation hub? What have you learned from kind of supporting this ecosystem and building it over the last 5 years?
Well, the one thing is that you've got to have talent and you've got to produce it. And I think we're doing that. We've got in this very region 16 post-secondary institutions with more than 400,000 students. And so we've got a pipeline. They're not all studying STEM curriculum, but a lot of them are. And of course, within reasonable distance of here, you have schools like Waterloo and so on, which are globally renowned. And we have a very open immigration policy, which is specifically tailored to making sure that if we identify the best and the brightest from other countries, we can get them here quickly to help our startup companies or to help global companies scale up their talent. But I think talent is by far the most important thing. And we have, through our public education system, the ability to, pull and push the levers to make sure that the kind of talent that's coming out of that system is going to be what we need to keep growing our reputation in tech and supplying the needs of those companies who come here or who are already here. So I think that's most important. After that, I'm sort of actually of the view nowadays, I think a critical mass of other industries is important because you sell and demonstrate and show your stuff in financial services, life sciences, and so on. And then after that, I think it's a way of life. I think the way of life that starts to be spoken to by the immigration policy that says we are accepting of people, no matter who they are, where they come from, if they're smart people that want to work hard.
So you're not building a wall around Toronto?
No, and we wouldn't think of such a thing. And, we think that the approach should be exactly the opposite because we've seen what it's done for us to have waves of immigrants, including waves of refugees come here. And even, when I say even the refugees who came from unbelievable circumstances have been in their different waves, Vietnamese, Tamil, Syrian, Ishmaeli, and so on. They have made extraordinary contributions and continue to, including to the development of the tech ecosystem. So to us, immigration is a necessity, and it's been a huge boon to us in terms of what it's brought the city.
No, I think that's critical. The other thing I wanted to ask you is how much sharing actually happens between you and other mayors of major cities, Canadian and otherwise, in terms of what are the things that have actually worked for Toronto? Are you taking ideas from other places? Are you sharing the ideas in terms of what has worked? Because the reason why I ask is because that's often how innovation happens, is that you disseminate ideas to other sectors and then other people innovate.
I went on a trip last year, a couple of years ago, with the mayor of Montreal. We went together to Israel, and the focus of it was tech. And we went there to sort of say to a lot of the very brilliant tech entrepreneurs over there, if you're looking for a base of North American operations, consider Montreal or Toronto. So in that sense, I'm very open, and I've also forged an alliance with the senior officials in the Waterloo area, because I look, we call it the Toronto Waterloo Innovation Corridor. So I'm not averse. I think a rising tide lifts all boats. In terms of ideas at the city, I will say that the ones we've taken have more to do with the kind of internal innovation ecosystem here. So we've looked at an office of innovation similar to what they have in quite a few American cities, and sort of created one here. So ideas like that, yes, I'm not averse at all to sort of saying, well, if it's worked for, San Francisco, where they have an office of innovation, then it can work here. We do it our own way. But if you said, are there a lot of formal consultations like that? No, probably not as many as there should be. And that may be partially related to the fact that we end up considering ourselves competitors. I don't know. I certainly don't look at it that way. I look at it that I'd be happy to tell anybody, what lies behind the success of what we're doing here, which I think principally has to do with a way of life and an embracing of diversity, and an open policy when it comes to sort of bringing the best and the brightest to the table in Toronto. But, beyond the education system, and I would certainly recommend public education to anybody, because I think it gives the government the levers to mix and match what you need. But I think there is less of that kind of collaboration than you might expect.
Hello, everyone. This is Jason Stack, associate producer here at FUTUREPROOF. The clip we just heard from Mayor Tory indicates he has a deep understanding of what leads to success in technology, industry, and infrastructure. Similarly, our next guest, Miki Toliver King, the Chief Marketing Officer of The Washington Post, understands what leads to success in media. What does the future of the news industry look like, and how should media outlets hope to achieve long-term health?
How healthy would you say the news media is at the moment? And I'm thinking, in terms of fake news and all these other things, that we're dealing with right now. How would you rate the overall health of news media?
I like to think about, one of the things that I spend a great deal of time thinking about is, how does the media stay focused in a moment like this, where, as you said, there are many different forces that are, kind of playing against, whether it's the narrative of the media that's coming out of various sources, whether it's the administration or special interest or wherever that might be. How does the media stay focused and stay on task to ensure that we are staying true to our mission moving forward? I don't know that I have a rating per se. What I think is really most important is for news organizations to identify what their mission is, identify where it is that they want to and need to be focused for their audiences, and then determine how well they are staying true to what that mission is. I think that all of us need to take stock there. So rather than, how well do we think people like us, I think it's more about identifying what is it that we are here for, and how well are we performing against what we say that mission is. That's the charge, I think, for news organizations, because I think if every news organization can identify what is its true north and then really walk toward that, that's where we will all be in the healthiest place as an industry.
I would hope. I love that kind of optimism almost, that I'm reading into that, which I think, we can all hope for. But one thing that strikes me in terms of where media is right now is that you kind of have a few different types of organizations that don't necessarily agree on what the role of media should be in general, if that makes any sense, because everybody should follow their North Star in terms of their agreed upon mission. But it's like, if you play basketball, there are certain rules that every team has to play by, but within that, you can innovate as long as you follow the core rules of basketball. So, I mean, what should the role of media be if you had to almost establish the guidelines for what news media is and what it is not, across the gamut, the rules that everybody should, aspire to and play by, then what would those be?
And I also think, and I'm glad that you narrowed that down in the last part of your question to news media, because I think that media is so broad, and I almost there are times when I hear the term and I cringe, because I don't think that we necessarily fall into the broader category of media. But I do think that news organizations need to be committed to being truth tellers. I think that getting to the heart of what is behind a story, beyond the headline, beyond the hashtag, beyond the emotion of the moment, really understanding how to get at the heart of what the issues are, so that we are not telling people what to think, but we are giving them the facts and the tools and exposing every side of every part of a story, so that we are empowering people to think independently. So, that is how I think of the role of a news organization. It's not about proselytizing. It is about getting to a place where we not only present you with all of the facts, but we create in you the curiosity to learn more. And if we've done that, I think we've done our jobs. And what we would like to think is that what we are bringing is the full picture, the full story. We're not just giving you the angle that you want to hear, but the full story that allows you to be able to make the right decisions about where you're going to activate, how you're going to vote, how you're going to move within your community. That is, equipping you with that level of knowledge is what I believe is the role of the news media.
And I think that that's something that, a whole lot of things can change and be disrupted. But I think that hopefully people will adhere to the basic principles that you laid out, because I think those are, really fair rules of engagement. And at some point, if the news changes too much, it stops becoming the news, really. So
yeah, I agree.
American citizens and politicians agree that what we want for our country is long-term health and prosperity. What we can't seem to agree on is how to get there. Matthew Yglesias, author, podcast host, and co-founder of Vox, knows a thing or two about historical political missteps, as well as current controversies and how they are shaping our future.
Would there ever be a case study written about the country that was focused on banning social sharing apps, and that was the key to their success over the next 20 years? I don't know if that case study would get written.
Exactly. And just something I think about is connecting these two themes of decline is there's so much to fight about in politics always, like whether it's a tweet or it's abortion or it's should we have pickup trucks or should we all drive Priuses like me? There's like a lot to argue about. But what do we agree on? Mainstream people, look, there's cranks on any topic. Everybody, whether it's Biden or Trump or Bernie Sanders, they like pose for their speeches in front of their American flags. And they say they want good things for America. Like they want America to be a leader in the world, right? Whether that's on climate change or whatever other topic. People's Republic of China government, it seems pretty bad. Like they are cracking down on freedoms in Hong Kong, showing they can't really be trusted to keep up their commitments. There's this, I guess you would call it genocide unfolding in Xinjiang over there, a political system that you look at Bill Clinton announcing permanent normal trade relations. He says, we're going to integrate our markets and it's going to spread democratic values to China. They're going to see they need to get on the internet and the explosive force of free ideas is going to take over there. And like that wasn't true. That didn't work out. And I'll be honest, I believed it too. I was in college at the time. There was a lot of disputes about globalization. I thought a lot of valid concerns were raised about that agreement, about its impact on labor standards and the environment. But I figured, hey, if they want to develop, they're going to need to open up to modern communication technology. They're going to see foreign media. And like none of that has happened. Very effective censorship. Political system has, in fact, the opposite, right? So technology has become a tool of domestic surveillance. And economic integration has exported Chinese values rather than American values. So PEN America did this great report about how Chinese censors now dictate the content of American movies. They don't just censor it in the Chinese edition. They say, look, if you want to play in China, you got to change it globally. And because China is a larger movie ticket market than the United States. What they say goes. And you like Mulan just came out. This is obviously not in my book, but there's this kind of like weird thank you to the provincial authorities in Xinjiang, where some of the most horrific human rights abuses in the world are unfolding. And it's because Disney, like, they really wanted the China market for that movie. So they like went the extra mile. This movie stuff, like, it's not the end of the world, but it shows that the policy trajectory we set ourselves on is not working out. And we need a change in course. And Trump, to his credit, sometimes talks about a change in course, but it's very muddled. So one day he'll be saying we need to decouple economic integration. The next day he'll be saying, look, we really just want to sell more soybeans. And Democrats have, it's interesting. It's a rare subject where you find some bipartisanship in Washington. A lot of support for some of these moves against Huawei, against TikTok, but no real national conversation about what's going to get it done here.
Hey guys, Jeremy again. From culture to business to technology and politics, the future is rapidly approaching. It's a world of infinite unknowns and can easily feel overwhelming and intimidating. But hearing from these inspiring futurists gives us hope for a future full of innovation, reinvention, and equality. We hope you enjoyed revisiting some of our favorite episodes with us on this very special 100th episode of Future Proof, and we'll see you next time. Until then, I'm Jeremy Goldman, and you've been listening to Future Proof.